Good evening, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started with 380 in your hymnal there. Let's go ahead and stand as we sing Jesus Saves, 380. We'll sing all four verses there. 380, Jesus Saves. We have heard the joyful sound. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Spread the tidings all around. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Bear the news to every land. Climb the steeps and cross the waves. Onward 'tis our Lord's command. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Wafted on the rolling tide. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Tell to sinners far and wide. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Sing ye islands of the sea. Echo back ye ocean caves. Earth shall keep her jubilee. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Sing above the battle strife. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. By his death and endless life. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Sing it softly through the gloom. When the heart for mercy craves. Sing in triumph o'er the tomb. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Give the winds a mighty voice. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Let the nations now rejoice. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Shout salvation full and free. Highest hills and deepest caves. Praise our song of victory. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. All right, good singing tonight. Sam, would you open in prayer for us, please? Thank you, Sam. You may be seated. Turn over a couple pages to 383. We'll sing 383, No, Not One, 383. There's not a friend like the lowly Jesus. No, not one. No, not one. None else could heal all our souls' diseases. No, not one. No, not one. Jesus knows all about our struggles. He will guide till the day is done. There's not a friend like the lowly Jesus. No, not one. No, not one. No friend like him is so high and holy. No, not one. No, not one. And yet no friend is so meek and lowly. No, not one. No, not one. Jesus knows all about our struggles. He will guide till the day is done. There's not a friend like the lowly Jesus. No, not one. No, not one. There's not a friend that he is not near us. No, not one. No, not one. No night so dark, but his love can cheer us. No, not Jesus. No, not one, no, not one. Did ever saint find this friend forsake him? No, not one, no, not one. Or sinner find that he would not take him? No, not one, no, not one. Jesus knows all about our struggles. He will guide till the day is done. There's not a friend like the lowly Jesus. No, not one, no, not one. Was there a gift like the Savior given? No, not one, no, not one. Will he refuse us a home in heaven? No, not one, no, not one. Jesus knows all about our struggles. He will guide till the day is done. There's not a friend like the lowly Jesus. No, not one, no, not one. All right, thank you for singing tonight. You can put those aside and then pull out your outlines. If you didn't get one, they're on the back table there. I encourage you to have one to follow along with us tonight. And we'll be looking at our studies in Proverbs tonight. Maybe just about 2 more messages on this topical study of Proverbs. But tonight, I want to look at the theme of our wants, wanting. And we could also use the term lust. Typically, that's used primarily in regard to like the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes. But I think it also relates to other kinds of things that we desire. And we're going to see tonight that it can also be used in a positive way. So that's why I use the word wants, wisdom with our wanting. And I think it's interesting that our world tends to try to manipulate us depending on the desires that we have. And they will often advertise to us, telling us to follow our heart. Maybe it's to have it our own way, or maybe believe that we deserve it, so that they can sell us a product or get us to buy what they want to sell us. But the way of wisdom, as we're going to see tonight, teaches us to guard our heart against the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, those areas which draw us into temptation and sin. But I think this is interesting. Our hearts naturally want respect. We want affection. We want intimacy of various levels, sustenance. We need food. We need things to sustain us. We need comfort. These are things that are basic necessities, basic desires that we have, and they're generally good. However, when we seek for these things outside of God's perfect will, which will include the proper source, maybe the proper timing, or maybe thinking about desiring that we would have more than we should have, they can easily become harmful to us. So, for example, God designed us to need affection, but when we seek for affection from someone else's wife, obviously that can cause great harm, not only to ourselves, but also to others and the relationship that is designed for them. So we can easily look for what we desire, what we need, from wrong sources at wrong times and in wrong amounts, and that can be harmful to us. So here's our main truth tonight as we look into this study of Proverbs on the topic of wanting, because wanting what God has not given leads to sin. We need to learn to be content. Okay? So because wanting what God has not given to us, that leads to sin, we should choose to be content with what God has given us, with what He's given us, the amount that He's given us, from the source that He's given us, the time that He gives it to us. So here then, and I think you know these, what are 2 contrasting ways related to our wants? And so this is number 1 and number 2 tonight if you're taking notes there. The worldly way. There's the worldly way with wants and what the world tells us to do about our wants. We're going to see what that means. And then secondly, obviously, we're going to see the wisdom way. That's number 2. And so we'll see both of those contrasting perspectives that we can identify as it relates to what we desire, what we want. Okay, let's begin with prayer tonight as we look at these two opposing perspectives. Father, help us tonight as we look into the book of Proverbs and a few other passages as well to see what your word tells us as it relates to our desires. Lord, some of these desires can be natural and it can be helpful, good for us, but Lord, sometimes we want to go beyond what you've prescribed. Help us to recognize that that will always cause harm, not only to us, but often to others around us. So, Father, help us to learn to be content and trust that you will provide what we need at the proper time, the proper place, the proper way. And it's in Jesus Christ's name I pray. Amen. Okay, let's begin tonight by looking at the worldly way with wants. And I think we got to be on guard because, again, the world is not our friend when it comes to this kind of context. And they will often encourage us to just indulge. And so we've talked about indulgence. We've talked about being undisciplined in our life in a variety of ways. But this is another way that we can be undisciplined. So letter A, let's talk first about some definitions. And I think that always helps us to kind of think through what we're talking about. So when we talk about lust or we talk about desires or wants, let's start by looking at, number one, the definitions. Letter A, the definition. Number one, sinful actions begin with the lusts of the heart. So James chapter 1, verses 14 to 15, I think are the most famous passages that tell us this. But every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin, and sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death. So the lust does not originate in the world. It doesn't originate in the devil. It originates in our own sinful flesh, but the temptation may originate with the world or the devil or even our own flesh. So the temptation comes when our lust is aggravated, it's incited, and it becomes enticed. And as that lust begins to develop, it says conceived here, it brings forth sin. It's almost the picture here of childbirth, conception, and then bringing forth the idea of delivery, bringing forth sin, and that sin baby, I guess you could call it, when it grows up, when it continues to develop, it ultimately brings about death. And we know that's true from Romans 6:23. The wages of sin is death. And so therefore, we ought to always beware, not just the sin that comes from the lust, but the lust itself, which leads to the sin, which leads to death, which ultimately is separation from God. For the Christian, that may be temporary separation in our fellowship, but for the one who doesn't have faith in Christ to bring pardon for sin, that could result in eternal death, separation from God. So it's a serious matter. So sinful actions begin with the lusts of the heart. That's where they start. So I think then it's natural for us to realize we need to guard our heart, because the heart is what causes us to give into the lusts of the heart and indulge in things that are unhelpful. So number two, one must guard his heart, which is the source of actions and words. Proverbs, let's go there. Proverbs 4:23 and 24. Keep thy heart with all diligence. Guard it, protect it. So don't follow your heart, as Disney often suggests. Rather, guard your heart. Keep your heart like a goalkeeper on the soccer field. Keep that heart. Guard it with all diligence. Be focused and make sure you continue to do it. Don't let your guard down, for out of it are the issues of life. The heart is what leads you to go in the directions and the paths and the dreams that you may have for the future of your life. Notice then, he says right away, put away from thee a froward mouth, a perverse mouth, perverse lips put far from thee. So the heart produces what comes out of the mouth. And Jesus said, of course, the same thing in the New Testament. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So out of the evil treasure of the heart comes evil words, but out of the good treasure of the heart comes
good words. So we can evaluate a person's heart based upon the words that they say, and also the thoughts, if we could read their mind. Of course, God knows our thoughts and our motives, but we don't always see those. So we need to guard our heart. Let's take a look at a definition then. Number 3, heart refers to the seat of one's emotions, will, and intellect. And so the heart, we mentioned already, it is the source of our actions and words, our motives, our dreams. So therefore, we have to guard the heart, which is the source of all of these other things, the emotions that we have, the will, which makes the choices and decisions, and of course the intellect, the knowledge that we have and what we do to act upon that knowledge. So the heart is the biblical word of talking about the center of your being. And that's why it's so important for us to invest in teaching our heart, guiding our heart to think rightly and to act rightly and to choose rightly. Okay, number 4, our hearts want, as I've mentioned, respect, affection, intimacy, sustenance, comfort. We could probably make more on this list, and these are not wrong things. I think God designed for us to desire these things, to need these things, but here's the problem. Number 5, when these desires go beyond God's prescription, that's when they become lusts. And so lusts, the root word for lust is not necessarily something wrong, but the word lust has more of the negative connotation of something. It's a desire that has gone beyond what God prescribes. And it's almost something that seems like we can't control it. It just seems like we just lust after, we desire it, and we have not chosen to restrain those desires. So that's the definition here. Number 6, lust means desire, and it also means covet. So when you find the word covet, it's the same root as the word for lust, especially in the Hebrew. It means to take pleasure in. It means to delight in. So those could be positive things, to take pleasure in something or delight in something, unless, of course, those things are wrong or sinful. But naturally, again, it could have a positive application. So some of the things that we desire, it's natural and right to desire them. But again, if we try to take them outside of the context that God has prescribed and designed, that's when they become dangerous. BDB, by the way, is a Brown Driver Briggs Hebrew Lexicon. So here's an application for you. Will you trust God to provide your needs safely and sufficiently? Because He knows the safe place where you can get those things and the sufficient amount. Remember, the Lord is our shepherd. I shall not want. I shall not lack what is needful to me. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. And that's a reminder He's going to take me to a place where I can graze, metaphorically, to get what I need, and also to be at a place where I'm safe from maybe a dangerous current in the stream. And so God's going to help me. You know, I think we understand this relation to children. I have children. And if I let them, if we had a hot batch of chocolate chip cookies just came out of the oven, they would probably eat all of them if I let them. So there has to be some parental restraint to say, no, that's not good for you, that's not healthy. Maybe you can have one, maybe two. But for us, there are also things that we desire that we may not really stop and think about the damage or the harm it could cause us if we indulge in what we desire. So that's why we need to let the Lord, our Heavenly Father, caution us, guide us to where we can have something healthy, proper, good, that would be right, safe and sufficient. Okay, let's talk about letter B, the description. So we're going to take a look now at how the Bible describes this worldly way with lust. So first of all, let's notice that the worldly way desires what God has not given. What God has not given. Remember I mentioned that lust can also be translated covet. Exodus 20, verse 17, that's that verse, that word, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor. So in modern context, we could say that would be like your tractor or your Kubota out there in the garage, or maybe it would be your sports car, your truck. Whatever it is that you prize and value, don't covet what your neighbor has, because God's not given that to you. Now, maybe he will eventually, but you ought not to just be pining away, wishing you had it if God hasn't given to you yet. Now, if God does in the future, be grateful for that. But be content with what he gives you, not always trying to get something bigger and better. So, the worldly way desires what God has not given. Secondly, the temptation to lust comes from the world, the flesh, or the devil. And so, I didn't say the lust comes, but the temptation to lust comes. The lust comes from your heart, but the temptation to lust could come from any of those three sources, the world, the flesh, or the devil. So we've got to be aware that certainly each of these, maybe the world, it's through maybe a person, maybe it's through an advertisement, something visual that you see. The devil, we know that he came and personally tempted Christ in three specific ways: the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life. But of course, he, or maybe it would be one of his minions, a demon, could come and tempt us in that way as well. But the flesh is probably the most common way that we're tempted because of things that we desire. Okay? So let's notice then number 3, they encourage, these three sources, encourage the heart to be discontent with what God has given. Thinking, well, it's not enough, or it's not nice enough. And so we become discontent, which leads to lust for what God has not given us. Okay, notice then number 4, for example, the eyes of man are never satisfied. Proverbs 27 verse 20 here says, "Thou shalt hell and destruction are never full, so the eyes of man are never satisfied." So 2 examples of things that are never full, and one of them is the eyes of man. And so that would be, I believe, referring to the lust of the eyes. And you know as well as I do that there's some who like to look at things that are inappropriate, and it never satisfied. It always leads to something worse, something more extreme, and it always leads down a dark hole, spiraling further and further away from what is good and wholesome. So the eyes of man are never satisfied. 1 John 2:16, "For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life," which is also another form of lust, desiring to be promoted, that others would view you as someone who is worthy of respect, the pride of life. These are not of the Father, but they are of the world. These are things that come from the world, that are influenced by the world. And by the way, our flesh, our heart, is also part of worldly thinking. We are one member of the world, and so it's natural that we would all have those similar struggles with these worldly temptations. Okay. Notice then number 5, the chief characteristic of lust then is discontentment, or we could say dissatisfaction. So it's good for us to identify what is it about lust that creates the problem. It's discontent, which in a sense is basically saying what God has provided is not good enough, it's not sufficient, therefore I have to go beyond what God has provided to take what I feel I need. So let me ask then, do you foster discontentment with what God has given you? This, of course, brought me to Genesis chapter 3 and verse 6, where God had put Adam and Eve in the garden. They had everything you can imagine. Every need was met. And yet, there was one thing God withheld, the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, really as a test to see if they would trust him. And when the serpent came, the devil came, he said, "Has God withheld this from you?" Suggesting that God had not provided everything that they needed. And so when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that would be the lust of the flesh, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, that's the lust of the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, that would be the pride of life, wanting to feel wise, she took of the fruit thereof and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. So, that's how it works. That was the first sin, and it came about with discontentment, dissatisfaction with what God had given. And in their case, God had given everything possible to enjoy. In our case, he's given us everything that we need, and we need to be content. Okay, let's talk about letter C, the destruction. Sometimes we can think, well, what's the big deal? Why is lust a problem. In fact, most of the times, lust is internal. And how can someone even know that we are lusting or desiring or coveting what God has not given us? Well, the Bible tells us certainly that's wrong, but it doesn't typically stay on the inside. That's why the Bible says if a man looks upon a woman to lust after he's committed adultery already in his heart. So it raises the standard merely from outward physical action to inward desire when it becomes wrong and we are indulging in thoughts that are inappropriate. So let's talk about the destruction, letter C. Number 1, acting on lust for others' possessions, Proverbs says, is a self-made trap. A self-made trap. You are setting a trap for yourself. And that obviously is not wise to do that. All right? Proverbs 1:17, surely in vain this net is spread in the sight of any bird, and they lay wait for their own blood, they lurk privily for their own lives. So are the ways of every one that is greedy of gain, which taketh away the life of the owners thereof. And so if we basically lay a trap to take away the possessions of someone else, we're actually laying a trap for ourselves. May not be a physical trap, but it's a spiritual trap. And it will lead into further and further destructive behavior and could lead to great consequences as well. Number 2, acting on lust for wine. We talked about this last 2 weeks. Brings sorrow, poverty, pain, strife, and additional things. Proverbs 23, I'll just read verses 29 and 30. It says, who hath woe, who hath sorrow, who hath contentions, who hath babbling, who hath wounds without cause, who hath redness of eyes, they that tarry long at the wine, they that go to seek mixed wine. Earlier in that chapter, it talks about how it brings poverty as well. So it's destructive. And acting on that lust, we talked about addiction a couple weeks ago. This goes hand in hand with that problem of addiction. Really, addiction starts with lust, and the more you indulge in lust, it leads to an addiction of continuing to try to indulge that lust, which does not actually solve it. It's kind of like, have you ever had a child, maybe you've done it, maybe you remember it, when you have an itchy spot, maybe it's poison ivy, something like that, or a bug bite, and the temptation is to scratch it, and to scratch it, and to scratch it, and to scratch it, and to scratch it, until it starts to bleed. And you think, well, if I just scratch it, then it'll go away. And the truth is, with lust, you think if I just indulge the lust, then I won't feel this desire, and it will go away. Lust cannot be satisfied by indulging in the lust. So instead, we should use the salve. And so maybe it's the calamine lotion, or maybe it's the anti-itch, some type of, maybe it's like an antihistamine, something like that, to help make it stop itching, make the swelling go down, reduce the inflammation. And that makes a lot more sense than just scratching it, because that doesn't actually solve the problem. And in our case, the salve, as you're going to see further down, is to listen to the will of God and to be content with what God's given us and to trust that He will provide what we need. We'll talk more about that further down. But number 3, acting on lust for pleasure brings poverty or sickness. And so we're talking not just about desires for wine or things like that, but also just luxury. Look at Proverbs 21:17. He that loveth pleasure shall be a poor man. He just wants to go out and enjoy all sorts of pleasurable things. He spends all his money on pleasure because that's one of his desires. Sometimes people call it like an adrenaline junkie. They just want to do extreme things and spend their money on doing extreme things, and they're going to end up being a poor man. He that loveth wine and oil, kind of a reference to luxury there, shall not be rich. Here's another example, Proverbs 25:16. Hast thou found honey? So sweet things that we might enjoy. Eat so much as is sufficient for thee. Don't indulge that desire until it makes you sick, lest thou be filled therewith and vomit it. A little bit awkward there, but I think it makes the point that we can easily eat more than we should. I shared the story of my daughter eating cookies at the Christmas caroling event, and she realized that was a bad idea. But sometimes we do the same thing. We just overindulge, and then we feel sick, and we think, why did I do that? It just summarizes how we often act and how we feel afterwards. All right, number 4, acting on lust for women. The Bible is very clear, especially in regard to that physical kind of lust. It could go both ways, women for men, but typically it's men for women. Puts one in a deep ditch. In other words, a place where it's very difficult to climb back out, or a narrow pit, it says, and leads to death, bondage, foolishness, poverty, loss of innocence, destruction, wound, dishonor, and hell. So, those are all pretty severe consequences, because I think this is one of the most serious ways that people indulge their lust. And I do want to take a look at these verses. So look at 23, 27. For a whore, a prostitute, is a deep ditch, and a strange woman, in other words, someone who is a stranger to you, you don't know her motives, you don't know her background, is a narrow pit, place from which it's very difficult to climb out. Proverbs 2:18, for her house inclineth unto death, and her paths unto the dead. Proverbs 5:22 and 23, his own iniquity shall take the wicked himself, and he shall be holden with the cords of his sin. He shall die without instruction. This is in the context of adultery. And in the greatness of his folly he shall go astray. Proverbs 6:26, for by means of a whorish woman a man is brought to a piece of bread. That's all. That's all he has left. And the adulteress will hunt, almost like a lioness, will hunt for the precious life, like a predator. Proverbs 6:29, so he that goeth in to his neighbor's wife, whosoever toucheth her shall not be innocent. Loss of innocence. And then also chapter 7, verse 27. I missed one. 6:32 and 33. Whoso committeth adultery with a woman lacketh understanding. He that doeth it destroyeth his own soul. A wound and dishonor shall he get, and his reproach shall not be wiped away. And Proverbs 7:27. Her house is the way to hell, going down to the chambers of death. So very serious consequences, very serious warnings there, which really is the most destructive, I think, kind of lust. So will you remember that indulging lust will not satisfy lust? It doesn't work. Okay, let's move on to the second perspective on our desires, our wants, and that would be the wisdom way. So contrasting what we've just seen with the worldly way, letter A, let's talk there about the distinction. The distinction. So first of all, number 1, let's notice that the way of wisdom teaches one to guard his heart against lust. The way of wisdom teaches one to guard his heart against lust. We all have lusts. We all have desires that go beyond what God has prescribed, and we have to suppress those lusts. Say no to those lusts. Guard against their influence. So chapter 4, verse 23, keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. It will affect all of the choices that you make during your lifetime. So how do we do this? Well, number 2, to guard his heart, he must also guard his mouth, his eyes, his ears, and his walk. Some of you maybe are familiar with the book Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan. He also wrote another book called The Holy War. The Holy War. And in that, he kind of personifies man's heart. He calls it the city of man's soul. And the heart of man has various gates that have to be guarded, like the eye gate, the ear gate, the mouth, I guess you could say as well, but the other senses as well. But the point is, we've got to guard what we put into our ears, guard what we put through our eyes, because it will affect our heart, our soul. So we've got to really be cautious. Take a look at chapter 4, verse 24 and 25. Put away from thee a froward mouth and perverse lips put far from thee. Let thine eyes look right on, focus. Let thine eyelids look straight before thee. So be careful about what you are looking at, what you are focusing on. Don't look to the left, don't look to the right. Look on what is good and proper and what is in front of you. Chapter 6, verse 25, lust not after her beauty. Again, talking about the woman who is trying to tempt you. Her beauty in thine heart, neither let her take thee with her eyelids. Almost like batting her eyes, fluttering her eyes, trying to attract his attention. Also, guard your ears. Proverbs 5:3, for the lips of a strange woman drop, or we could say drip, as an honeycomb, a very smooth and sultry kind of voice, and her mouth is smoother than oil, the way she speaks to you and flatters you. So you've got to guard your ears, because those things will lead you astray. Also, Proverbs 6:24, to keep thee from the evil woman, from the flattery of the tongue of a strange woman. She's going to tell you things that you want to hear. I've been kind of emphasizing this with the boys on Tuesday nights with basketball, because a guy likes to feel affirmed and respected and praised. And so when a woman or girl tells him all the things that he likes to hear, it really kind of gets through his better judgment, and he begins to think that's true, and he's taken advantage of. Proverbs 7:5, that they may keep thee from the strange woman, from the stranger which flattereth with her words. So that's one area we can guard ourselves, but also guarding our path, where we go. Proverbs 4:26 and 27, ponder the path of thy feet, let all thy ways be established. Turn not to the right hand nor to the left. Remove thy foot from evil. Here's an example, Proverbs 7:8, talking about a young man who does not beware where he's going. It says he's passing through the street near her corner, talking about the strange woman, the prostitute, and he went the way to her house. Okay, already, even though he's not sinned yet, he is setting himself up for failure. He's going to the place where she is going to see him, he's going to see her, and then she will speak to him, and the temptation will become stronger and stronger. So we've got to guard our heart, which means guarding our mouth, eyes, ears, and our walk, where we go. All right, number 3, love God and trusting Him to meet your needs also guards the heart. So that means that we are loving God instead of loving pleasure, loving what we want. We are keeping our affection on God, and we are trusting that He will provide what we need. And by the way, He's going to provide even more than we need, because He's a good and gracious God. He always gives us better than we deserve. So, but the point is, we've got to trust Him to do so. So, let me ask, do you love God supremely? We use the word love in so many different ways. You know, we love chocolate cake. We love to go fishing, whatever it might be. But when we talk about loving God, it ought to be loving God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And if we love God in that way, everything else will be less important. And then we're going to trust Him to provide for us what we need and what is good for us and what we're going to enjoy in the proper context. Trust Him to meet your needs. Okay, letter B, let's talk about some details. Letter B is the details. So how do we do this? How do we have this perspective, the wisdom perspective on our desires? First of all, number 1, fearing God includes fear of consequences, and that's healthy. Why do you not touch the hot stove? Because you don't want to get burned, okay? So that's logical. It's helpful. You don't want to take fire in your bosom. It talks about that in Proverbs 6, because you're going to get burned, okay? So it teaches you to fear the consequences of touching things that you ought not touch. And also, trusting Him means that we trust that His purpose, His plan, is better than our own plan. Look at chapter 16, verse 6. By mercy and truth, iniquity is purged, and by the fear of the Lord, men depart from evil. Again, that means fearing the consequences that God may bring, but also trusting that God knows better. That's part of fearing God. Fearing Him means I'm not fearing man. I'm not fearing the lack of something I desire to have, but I'm trusting God to provide it for me. So fearing God, it also means trusting God and believing that He knows better than I do. Okay, let's move on then. Number 2, choosing to do right eventually puts your thoughts in order. Sometimes we struggle with lust because we have thoughts that we just don't know what to do with. And those thoughts seem like they're just controlling us. Proverbs gives us a strategy here. Proverbs 16:3 says, "Commit thy works unto the Lord, and thy thoughts shall be established." Well, many times what goes into our thoughts came from the actions that we did. So if we stop doing certain actions which feed certain thoughts, then those thoughts will become less strong and prominent in our minds. For instance, if you're looking at things that you ought not look at, then you're going to be able to imagine those pictures and variations of those pictures in your mind all the time. So how do you control that? Well, avoid what you put into your mind through what you look at. So that's one way in how your actions, your works, when those are established, when you give those to God, then your thoughts will start to become disciplined. They will start to line up and get in order. One of the things that I learned to do as a young man is when a thought entered into my mind that shouldn't be there, it says in 2 Corinthians 10:5, cast out those imaginations. Every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. So I guess you could say almost in my mind, I would grab that thought and basically throw it out of my mind and say, no, I'm not going to think that thought. It's a false thought. Philippians 4:8 gives us that filter as well. Whatsoever things are true and good and honest, of good report, think on these things. So that filter, if it doesn't match, if it doesn't make it through the filter, then you throw that thought out. So, but I think it starts with committing your works to the Lord. What you do to feed those thoughts, that's got to stop there, and then the thoughts will begin to line up in order. Okay, number 3, be satisfied in God to resist the short-lived pleasure of sin. You know, sometimes if a person has a steady diet of sin and the pleasure that comes from sin, they're not really going to value or appreciate the pleasure that comes from God, which is a lasting pleasure, a lasting joy, a deep, rich joy and pleasure. And so that's why I think a good example of this is when I was little, I've shared this illustration before, when we would have candy hunts around Easter time, my great aunt, she would hide these little chocolate eggs. They were Palmer. Maybe some of you know what I'm talking about. But I kind of found that they were a little bit more wax than they were chocolate. And after a while, I started tasting better kinds of chocolate. And I know there's more chocolates than just these, but Cadbury cream eggs. I had one of those, and I'm like, I think I've died and gone to heaven. And I decided that I didn't really like the Palmer chocolate eggs anymore because I had had something better. So what I'm suggesting is if you taste and see that the Lord is good, and it might take you a little time to acquire that taste. It's more of maybe a mature taste, we could say. You're not going to want to go back to the cheap sin pleasure of the world. It's just not going to be desirable to you anymore. You're going to be able to leave that behind because you see it's short-lived, it's shallow, it's worthless. And think about this. I think this verse helps sum it up. Proverbs 27:7, the full soul loatheth an honeycomb. Well, you know, in the ancient world, honeycomb was like the peak of sweetness and deliciousness. They didn't have, Cadbury cream eggs. But this is the idea. They had honeycomb. But if you're full, you don't even want that because you're satisfied. You don't want the honeycomb. You've got something that's already satisfied you. So notice here, but to the hungry soul who has nothing, they're looking for any kind of satisfaction, anything. Look, even every bitter thing is sweet. So sin, there's pleasure in sin for a season, but it's got a real bitter aftertaste. So the point is, if instead you are satisfied in God, you're not going to be drawn to the pleasure of sin because you're going to realize it's cheap, it's an imitation. It's like that fake fishing lure on the hook, and you're going to see past it and you're going to say, nope, I'm not interested, I don't want that. I know where I can get something much better. All right, number 4, God sees all things and he will hold you accountable one day. That's a good reminder to help us avoid giving in to sin that we know will bring God's consequences. Verse 3, the eyes of the Lord are in every place, beholding the evil and the good. Not just the actions, but look at verse 11. Hell and destruction are before the Lord. How much more then the hearts of the children of men? So God sees our hearts too. He sees the things that we think about that we don't want anyone else to know we're thinking about, the motives that we have, and he's going to hold us accountable for those too. All right, number 5. The wise man remembers that his actions affect others. So it's not just, well, it's not hurting me. It is, probably. But it's also going to harm others. The just man, Proverbs 27, the just man walketh in his integrity. His children are blessed after him. So when a man walks in integrity, it produces blessings on his children and his grandchildren. And that is an amazing thing. But if a man walks in perversion, it brings a curse, not only upon himself, but often on the second or third generation. Okay, let's wrap it up here. Will you choose to do right until you think rightly? Romans 12, 1 and 2. I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Find out what God's will is and accept that. And allow God to change your mind, change your thinking, change your heart, so that you trust him to provide what is good. Okay, finishing up, letter C, the doing. Hiding sin, number 1, is illogical and it's unproductive. You can't hide something from the all-knowing God who sees everything. Rather, we ought to confess it and forsake it. Proverbs 28:13, he that covereth his sins shall not prosper, but whoso confesseth and forsaketh them shall have mercy. Number 2, trust God to give you exactly what is good for you. James 1:17, every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, and cometh down from the Father of lights, with whom is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. So if it's good, God will give it to you. But if it's not good for you, he's not going to give it to you, and trying to take it or get it for yourself will not benefit you. So trust God to give you what is good for you, and trust him to know how much of it is good for you. Number 3, choose to be satisfied with what God has given you. Chapter 5, verses 18 through 20, it says, let thy fountain be blessed, to rejoice with the wife of thy youth. In other words, your first wife. Let her be as the loving hind and pleasant roe. Let her breast satisfy thee at all times, and be thou ravished always with her love. And why wilt thou, my son, be ravished with the strange woman? Embrace the bosom of a stranger. So be satisfied with what God has given you, your wife, your only wife, your first wife, and find a way to work it out with her. Trust God, number 4, to provide all you need at the right time, at the right place, and in the right way. This kind of made me laugh. I like reading Calvin and Hobbes comic strip, and I remember one particular comic where 6-year-old Calvin asks his stuffed pet tiger Hobbes to make a wish. And when Calvin asks what wish Hobbes made, he says that he wished for a tuna sandwich. Well, Calvin proceeds then to berate Hobbes for making a stupid wish, and he says that he would have wished for $1 trillion billion and, a nice jet and all sorts of other things. But a few minutes later, Hobbes is eating a tuna sandwich, and he makes the point that he got what he wished for. So the point is, wish for what you have, and learn to be content with what you have. In other words, wish for what you can have, or for what God is pleased to give you, and then you'll be content with what he does give you. So will you choose to be satisfied and content with what God gives you? You see, a wise man remembers that the lust of the eyes and the lust of the flesh are never satisfied. So he guards his eyes from gazing upon what is not his. He is motivated by his love for God, by his duty to God, by his promise of provision from God, and by his fear of God. He remembers that God sees all, knows all, and will hold him accountable for all that he thinks, says, and does. He guards his heart by guarding his mouth, his ears, his eyes, and his ways. He chooses to be satisfied with his wife, house, job, and possessions that God has graciously given to him. By the way, none of us deserve anything. We deserve God's judgment. So anything that we have is simply God's grace that we should be grateful for. Everyone has a natural desire for respect, affection, intimacy, sustenance, and comfort, but the wise man never seeks after these things in a way or from a source or in an amount that is outside of God's will for him. Father, I pray that you help us tonight as we think about these truths that we've heard from Proverbs on this topic of desire. I pray that you'll help us to be able to trust that you will provide all that we need, and Lord, not pursue or desire for things that you have not provided. It's in Jesus Christ's name I pray. Amen. Okay. Well,